Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and welcome to episode 283 of the H.A.M Radio Podcast. Now, this episode is going to be quite different from any prior episode in the show's history, which can be both exciting and terrifying, so please do bear with me for a moment. Now, myself, Karak, Dustin, we're all still on our holiday break, and fret not, next week we will be back to our normal show antics, debating Ice Cube socks, as well as the latest and greatest in gaming news. You know how our show rolls. We'll be back to that next week, but we didn't want to leave the show hanging for an empty week. We wanted to make sure you all have content to listen to, and I didn't want it to be a filler episode, right? I didn't want to do just myself talking and doing a Q&A, or just me and Dustin talking about random stuff. I thought, what would be the most valuable, worthwhile content? And then I had a eureka moment. So for those who are unaware, I was working on a pandemic documentary at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. I sat down with multiple employees for this now closed studio who have been scattered across the industry and talked to them about their time at Pandemic. For those who are unaware, Pandemic Studios has brought us the likes of Destroy All Humans, Battlefront 1 and 2, as well as Lord of the Rings Conquest, The Saboteur, Mercenaries. I mean, the list goes on. They really were path makers in our industry. They did such phenomenal work on a bunch of incredible games, and they just kept having banger after banger after banger. So as one of my favorite companies, I wanted to create a documentary about their studio and do a bit of a love letter, but also for people who are fans like me, unveil new information. So I sat down with multiple employees and interviewed them, and you will get new information in this, but part of the reason I'm not doing the full-on documentary and instead this is because my plans, and I was originally told, was to get design documents as well as exclusive gameplay, things that people have never ever seen before. And unfortunately, given the fact that I am a startup documentary creator, if that's even the right word, it's really hard to get your hands on those assets. It's extremely hard because it demands a lot of trust and care that you're going to handle it properly. So it's just about the right people trusting you at the right time. Unfortunately for this documentary, I could not get my hands on that stuff. I kept asking, kept pushing. It's why I kept delaying it for months and months and months. And eventually I realized the project would never be what I wanted to be, and I would always be unsatisfied and felt like I had under-delivered on something. So what I wanted to do with these interviews that do glean a lot of brand new information, that do give you some insight on the production, the process, and the downfall of Pandemic Studios and some personal anecdotes, is share with you the interviews I conducted. You'll be listening to 3 today. I did conduct more than that, but unfortunately in a couple, you can't hear my voice. So there's just them talking to me, and in one case, somehow the file got deleted. So I figured once again there, I was like, all right, this is clearly not meant to be in the way I wanted it to. But right now, what I have for you here today is going to be Cameron Brown, who really focused on Destroy All Humans, but he was there through a lot of the middle age, we'll say, of Pandemic. Then we also have Scott Warner, who focused primarily on the Mercenary series, as well as Tom French, who will wrap things up. Tom French focused mainly on the Saboteur, which ended up being the swan song game for Pandemic Studios as they closed down. It was a phenomenal open world game with a really unique style, and you'll kind of get their opinion, their impressions on how things worked, how things went. Unfortunately, 2 of the interviews I lost were with some of the higher ups, like the CEO of the studio, co-owner of the studio. So I'm really frustrated by that, but I did communicate with the patrons who had signed on for this project specifically on what we should do with that and pass this idea along. We got approval because I wanted to make sure it was okay with the people who were signing on for a certain product, and I'll make sure to make it up in a specific piece of content. I feel like you've seen it in the channel with its quality increase and the writing, as well as the backdrop and the studio space itself and the skits that we can do now. I feel like you've seen an increase in quality because of people's support over there, but I wanted to make sure I gave you like an actual physical piece of content to represent that. This was supposed to be it, but I thought that given the way things turned out, I would restart, look for a new team, look for a new idea here, see if I can build something from the ground up myself where I don't have to rely on the handouts of other content. But with that all in mind, I want to present to all of you the interviews I conducted for this documentary. I do hope you all enjoy it, and I will introduce each person beforehand, and then you'll hear it roll on and have me talking with all of these developers. And it's pretty cool stuff. It's definitely at a time where, last year, I would say I was not the best interviewer because I wanted to really focus on just letting them speak. So I'd ask them a very basic question and just try to poke in when I could. So if it doesn't sound as interactive or as charismatic as my interviews nowadays do, my discussions nowadays do, it's because I had a different focus and goal there. But enough of the, rambling from me at this point. I'm sure you want to hear the content if you're still here. I just want to make sure there was a thorough explanation up front of what's happening with this content, as well as, what was happening before all of this. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope you enjoy this. You will learn something new today. I can promise you that. And if you are new to Pandemic Studios, then please do look into their games. I'm sure these interviews will shine some light on some interesting stuff. Also, one last note, because OBS is a absolute turd of a program, I used that to record the interview so it would capture myself as well as my desktop when I was interviewing everybody. Sometimes my end will spike a little bit on the audio end, so I would just recommend bumping down the volume on your listening device, whether it's computer or your phone, just a little bit. I've gone into the actual recordings and tried to edit them where I can, but still you hear a little bit of a spike in my audio. So just so that you're not shocked or you jump a little bit, just a quick, small volume warning. Sometimes it just happens. I just want to make you all aware of that. Now, on with the show. And with that, it's time for me to sign out. Let me know what you think of all of this in the comments, and I'll talk with you soon. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace. Okay, so let's let the interviews begin. It's all with Cameron Brown, who focused mostly on Destroy All Humans.
Okay, so I'm Cameron Brown. I was creative director at Pandemic for about 10 years, mainly on the Mercenaries series, so Mercs 1, Mercs 2. Since Pandemic, I've worked at Microsoft on the HoloLens program, so kind of making crazy futuristic holographic headsets, and then about 3.5 years ago, left to start my own company called Rec Room. So we make a kind of virtual social club where people create and play games. That's now shipped on all the VR headsets. It's on PlayStation. It's on iOS. It's all over the place.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk Pandemic. The reason I was contacting you so frequently is because Scott's exact words were, you were the most influential and important person at Pandemic. Now, I know that's very high praise, but I would like to know from your perspective, why you think that may be the case, even if maybe you disagree or not, I don't know, but why would that be the case?
Well, Scott is wrong about many things, and this is just one of them. I think many people would challenge that characterization, I think very fairly. Like Pandemic was a big company. We had, usually 4 teams, 3 in LA, 1 in Brisbane, Australia. So there was a lot of people contributing to Pandemic. So I want to reject any sense of me being the most important person. I think, that said, I had a huge opportunity at Pandemic. I started there in, I want to say 2001. Coming over as kind of a lead designer. I grew up in Australia and I kind of came up through the Australian game industry. And when I got to Pandemic, it was, I think just as much good fortune as anything else that there was kind of a creative opening on one of the teams where they needed creative leadership. And so I kind of put my hand up and said, hey, I'm happy to do this. And kind of that ended up being the genesis of the Mercenaries project. Was that team. We kind of like started making prototypes and started making various things to pitch to various publishers. And so we were noodling around with like third-person games and kind of top-down arcadey console shooters. And I remember, it was around the time that GTA 3 had come out. And so we're all very influenced by GTA 3 and, that kind of open-world design. I'm a very systemic designer by nature. That's kind of what gets my creative juices flowing. So like GTA was like, just catnip for me. And so we were kind of working in this military space. We had like tanks and helicopters and like making a shoot 'em up game. And honestly, the big simple idea behind Mercenaries was, what if GTA, but in a war zone? That was basically the idea.
That's funny because when I was talking to Scott, that's kind of how I worded it exactly.
Yeah, I mean it was that simple. We're like, well, this is an amazing style of gameplay. Obviously that's the success of GTA is testament to that. But we thought, hey, what if we did that but with more explosions? And I think, talking to, so one of the founders of Pandemic was Andrew Goldman. And I remember talking to him, and we were chatting about this idea of like, we were both really vibing on GTA a lot. And he was thinking through, if you're a soldier, the whole thing about being a soldier is you got to follow orders, you got to do what you're told, you kind of put in a box. That doesn't really feel like conducive to open world gameplay. So he was like, well, what if you're a mercenary? What if you're like a hired gun and you didn't really have to follow orders, you just had to follow the money? And we were like, all right, that works, right? So that persona put into that gameplay style, just everything kind of clicked into the place. And so the next probably 6 or 7 years of my creative life were developing on that idea.
Wow. Yeah. And it certainly worked out. I mean, the games are great. And it
Thanks.
seemed like the open world almost, there was a set of rules, but it still felt sandboxy. It was in the DNA of Pandemic in a sense. When you look at the Saboteur, Mercenaries, I mean, was that like a trend you guys ended up following? Because the industry is, as you've seen nowadays, I think like it's sort of shifted into just everything has to be open world. But did you guys think you were onto something there, or was that more like it just fit the world space for your game ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, I think, probably there was a little bit more intention behind it from I'm thinking here of Greg Barude, who's another one of the founders, and who was very kind of influential in kind of driving a lot of the projects. I know he had a strong theory about the genre of games we would work in, which would kind of, he was big into third-person action, big into things that kind of had like, strong fantasies around them. Like, you want to be, a mercenary, or you want to be in Lord of the Rings, or you want to be in Star Wars. And so, I think there was kind of like, we felt like we found a niche of these third-person open-world action games that really suited the personality of the company, suited the people who were working on them. But just really fun games, into it. So I think we did specialize. I think we're like, hey, we got a bit of a formula here that works. Let's go explore and see what kind of different things we can make there.
Interesting, yeah, because you sort of had like two formulas. You had the open world sandboxy formula, but you also had I guess you could call it the Battlefront formula, which you saw get carried into Lord of the Rings Conquest. So it's kind of cool. You guys had these two paths of games that were so unique at their times. And so I know there was a Mercenaries 1, 2, and you guys were working on a 3.
That's right.
Would you mind talking about that a little bit? I guess just the development of it, how that all went, the ideas behind it.
Yeah, I mean, so we had done Mercs 1 and Mercs 2, and our kind of thinking for the setting of the Mercenaries games was we always wanted something kind of over the top, but something that felt kind of ripped from the headlines. Was our thinking at the time, so we had done a game set in North Korea, which was kind of crazy potential flashpoint, entirely too relevant in today's climate. I hate to say it. Same with Venezuela. Like, not sure I would choose to make games on those topics now. But anyway, this was 10, 15 years ago, so different time. But the idea for the third one was let's go global, right? Let's have it not be set in one place. Let's kind of go around the world, go to really different, like one of the inspirations for when we were choosing the settings for the Mercenaries was we wanted to put it in places that just hadn't been featured in games, either not at all or not very much. That was our intent. And so, I remember we had a test level was set in Dubai in the UAE.
Wow.
We remember doing this research of like, what are some of the craziest places that, that people haven't really visited, haven't really been in a game. And for Mercs 3, I remember we were excited by there's apparently in Dubai there is actually I ended up visiting it many years later, but there is an indoor ski slope in Dubai, which is like right in the middle of the desert, and it's just this giant air conditioned building with artificial snow and like a kind of alpine village in it. And we were like, well, that's kind of a crazy place that could be kind of interesting, and there's kind of an interesting oil connection in Dubai and the UAE, which gives us that kind of like geopolitical intrigue that that was kind of a backstory in the second one. And so we were going to Dubai. We had the game started in Cuba, which was really cool. We had this kind of cool Cuban level, so we didn't really get that far. We were only prototyping it, yeah, the idea was to go global, and yeah, I remember it starting with I think the kind of like geopolitical incident that we were kind of talking about was global warming was opening up the Arctic Circle. Oh, and wow. all of the major superpowers were like vying for control of the shipping channels and stuff up there. It was bringing them into conflict. You know, Russia was kind of coming up to the north. You know, the U.S. is coming up to the north, and everyone's getting all angsty. So yeah, the idea was, and I have some concept art of this, which was pretty cool. Was like the end of it was going to be up in the Arctic somewhere, this kind of crazy ice level. So yeah, it was pretty ambitious. Like we had a pretty big dream for Mercenaries 3 that unfortunately never saw the light of day because of the end of the studio. Right. But we had a playable prototype built in the Mercs 2 engine. I remember we were starting to play with kind of some of those kind of Boston Dynamics kind of security robot kind of stuff. Like we had these crazy like spider robots that were walking around and stuff. Like, so in a way we were kind of all over the place. I think we were like still in that very, you know, it's pretty typical early in a game. You go super, super broad, and we hadn't really narrowed it down to a really clear idea yet. I remember another fun idea from Mercs 3 was we were going to give you a kind of an ex-military. What are those helicopters with the two rotors that rotate? Okay. What are those ones?
I know what you're talking about. I can see it.
Hang on a second. Hang on. Hold right. Stay there for 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm coming back.
All right. This is great.
Actually, I have this next door because this is a piece of concept art that I saved from Mercs 3 that I really liked. Can you see this?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This was like this graffiti covered, like whatever. I forget the name of that aircraft, but they're like a cool, you know, tilt rotor thing. And that was going to be like your flying home base, like where you kind of land and, you know, because you're going like all around the world, right? So you're like land in a country.
That was going to be my next question was, you know, what was the way from getting to all these different locations in the world? So I'm guessing that was it.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It sounded interesting, and you said you didn't get that far into it. When did development actually start, if you recall?
Oh, God. So I am terrible with dates and have no memory for that kind of thing. But it must have been, it was probably like, you know, we spent, I don't know, I'm guessing 2009.
Okay, yeah, a ballpark. I was just curious.
Yeah, it would have been 2009-ish.
Okay, so you were working on one crazy series, and then there was another called Destroy All Humans. So I guess before we get to more finer questions on that, what did you necessarily do with that? Because I remember when I was looking at your LinkedIn, it just said you helped a bunch on it, so I don't know what that entails.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty accurate description. So I wasn't involved with the start of that project. That came out of our Australian studio, and so even though I'm Australian, I never really worked at the Australian Pandemic studio, although I do know a lot of the people there, you know, because Australian game industry is a small place, so everyone tends to know each other. And so, yeah, that game had they came up with that idea. They'd been working on it for a couple of years. You know, it was always just such an amazingly cool concept. You know, be the alien in a 50s, you know, B movie, just such a fun, awesome concept. And so, and they, you know, looked amazing. They had built a lot of really cool features. They had some really funny stuff in there. But, you know, it was getting close to that, you know, to when they were due to ship, and they were having a little bit of trouble just kind of getting it over the line. They're just in the very closing phases. So I went and worked on it for probably only 3 months or so, I would say. Mm-hmm. But I kind of flew over from the LA office and I basically just parachuted in to help them finish it. Cause I think it's fair to say they were pretty exhausted. It was a big game. It was their first open world game. You know, they had definitely run into some technical challenges and some design challenges. And so, yeah, I can't claim too much credit. I think it's fair to say I just kind of helped them focus it up at the end and make some kind of final cutting decisions, like where some things weren't working, maybe we could cut them. Where some things weren't working, and maybe we could invest a little more and get it over the line. Mm-hmm. Kind of, I think, you know, I remember working with, I think it was THQ at the time who was publishing, working with them to negotiate a little bit of extra time to kind of polish the game up. So yeah, all I really did was kind of just help them focus and polish it up to ship. And yeah, we ended up being like really, really happy with that game when it shipped. It was a amazingly fun experience when it came out.
So that's interesting to hear that perspective, that you sort of just kind of dropped in there. What, so was this a game you kind of just heard about at your other studio? Did you ever see anything for this, and then you sort of dropped in?
We would share builds back and forth. So they would send builds over from time to time. Okay. And so we would sit down in the LA studio. So I was pretty familiar with what they were doing, and we had been sending them feedback, and we had seen their E3 demo. Of course, they came over for E3, and THQ there was a big crazy booth at E3 with a UFO in it and stuff. And so I was very familiar with the concept, and knew what was going on, but yeah, never really thought about working on it until I forget who came to me and was like, hey, I think we need some help getting this one across the line. Do you want to go help out? And I was like, yeah, cool. Like, I'm from Australia. I'll go back and visit the homeland and spend a couple of months there helping out. It seems like fun to me. I forgot how hot it was, so that part I regretted.
So was this a game, that because you said you kind of dropped in the last 3 months and helped shape it up, and I was just wondering, with modern game development, is that is the window much bigger now, or was that because back then working on the PS2 and whatnot?
I think it's definitely fair to say, so full disclosure, I've been out of the AAA game for a while.
Right.
I kind of moved on to, prototyping, VR, AR stuff, and now make a game that's, that is, kind of a live online creative service as much as a AAA game. So, don't quote me on, production estimates for AAA games.
Just your perspective, I guess.
It was, in the PS2 era, the lead times for assets, for building things, for polishing things was definitely much shorter. Just the level of complexity was lower. So I remember even going to the PS3 and Xbox 360 era was added a lot of time and a lot of just extra polish. I think it was possible to make a pretty impactful difference in a few months. In a way that probably would be much harder if kind of trying to parachute into something like a modern Assassin's Creed or something like.
Oh God.
You'd be helping fix some bugs maybe.
So the other thing I wanted to ask is because the Mercenaries during this time with Destroy All Humans, I think Battlefront was just around the time of coming out or something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of consumers define that as the golden age of pandemic. I thought everything you guys did was great, but that was that, wow, they just dropped 3 amazing games in the same year. I just want to know, was it as nice on the inside as it was on the outside being a consumer?
My memory of I think Mercenaries shipped in 2005. I think we shipped Mercenaries and Battlefront and Destroy All Humans in 2005. I want to say something like that. That was a really, really fun couple of years. We really, in my take on it is definitely that was when we really hit our stride. I think that was when we were at our strongest. I think our methodologies of working, our production methodologies, our team sizes, the amount of time we were kind of allocating to make a game, I think really matched the PS2 scale games best. And I think it definitely took some adaptation for us to learn what it was going to be like to make a game for the PS3. It was everything kind of got leveled up in terms of complexity and cost and size and scale. And so, from memory, I remember, I'm proud of everything we did too. I think it was definitely more fun to make the PS2 era games. They were a bit of a lighter lift, and you could be a little more agile and creative in your decision making. I think the later games felt a lot heavier, and they were much more big oil tankers that were much harder to steer, whereas the earlier games were a little lighter. But 2005 was a very fun year for pandemic. I remember it was really fun to ship those games after working on them for several years and seeing the reaction from people who were playing it. There's a lot of excitement. It was very fun. It was kind of like early days from my perspective at least, of like, engaging with people on the internet. It was still like, I kind of came up from a very traditional, sounds funny to say, but a very kind of traditional game development background where we would like make a console game and then ship it. And like, you only had this really indirect, like, Twitch didn't exist and Discord didn't exist. So it wasn't as common to like, it wasn't as common to kind of talk to people. So we'd kind of been like developing the game more or less in a vacuum for 2 or 3 years. And then it finally came out and we were like, are people going to like it? We don't know. Could do nothing. And, so the fact that, people bought it and, people sent us excited letters and, I still have letters. I still have a few letters from kids. Actually, there was a funny Reddit thread not so long ago where someone posted a letter that I had written them. So they had written into Pandemic and they had said, oh, I like Mercenaries. It's my favorite game, blah, 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 like whatever. And I wrote a letter back to them, like, because I always would try and write back, because I always thought it was really, I always just really was touched when people would write a letter, and it was like, I remember when I was a kid how excited I would get about games and music and stuff that I liked. So anytime that someone was like excited about a game that we made, I was like, this is so cool. So I wrote back to this person, and then like 10 years later, they had a photo of the letter and they posted it to Reddit, just going, hey, here's a letter I got from Pandemic. And so I woke up that morning and people kept sending me this Reddit thread. And I was like, this is hilarious. And I went in there and was like, oh yeah, that's a letter I wrote. I had no memory of writing it. And so thank God I wrote nice things. And so I'm pretty active on Reddit. And so I went into the thread and was like, hey, that's me. Glad you liked the letter, blah, blah, blah. It was just a really funny moment of like 10 years later connecting back up with this person who liked the game.
That's crazy.
It was just,
Yeah. And speaking of, wrapping around, I was thinking of Destroy All Humans, and we can go back to that. They're remaking the first one. And what's it like working on the original and then seeing this come back and like it's still that same amount of excitement and people are pretty crazy about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I honestly haven't been paying super close attention.
Right.
But
look, I think it's the same game, except on current tech.
Yeah, exactly. I think I saw it briefly at E3 this year, and I'm like, that's cool. It's like it's testament to the strength of the original concept. It's like, if you're gonna, it has to be a pretty good idea to come back, 10, 15 years later, and it still makes sense, to a younger audience and with newer tech. Like, I think that's kind of sort of demonstrates that it was a pretty strong idea.
Yeah. Did you, I remember you saying like you decided sort of some things that could be cut or some things that would be staying into the main game. Was there anything in Destroy All Humans that I wouldn't say maybe you had the final decision on, but there was a team decision that you cut or kept, and did you guys afterwards go, oh, thank God we kept that? Or vice versa, should have kept that?
So, I mean, definitely there were things that we were like, all right, obviously we got to keep this. It's funny to say it, but the famous anal probe weapon that they made, was just like, that's just too funny. Like, like that's kind of unique in a game. You have to keep that. I remember we had long, torturous conversations about the jetpack that the character could do, because on the one hand, it was a super fun mechanic where you could be like, oh, it's really fun to fly around. It's really well tuned. They did a great job implementing it. So it was really, fun to use. On the other hand, it created a lot of level design challenges, because it was like, in Mercenaries, a lot of the level design we did, one of the level design tricks we would use is just kind of like, if you're designing a Mercenaries mission, flip your perspective around to be like, all right, pretend you're the bad guys and pretend you're trying to defend this building. How would you defend? So get into the objective looking out, and like, where would you park the trucks to block off the entrances, and where would you, where are the, the vulnerable points that you would be defending? And we found that doing it that way would often create a fairly natural feeling, when you then flipped it back and you were coming to invade that defended base, it would have a more realistic feel, because it felt like someone really kind of like thought through, the way you would actually defend it. And if you add a jetpack to that mix, and you can just suddenly hop over all of those defenses and just kind of land behind everybody, it's, it's not impossible. And I think we ended up getting a fairly good balance, but it was definitely I remember having discussions where like, man, this jetpack's fun, but can we actually make coherent level design when you can just have a super jump that you can just traverse over half of it? So that was definitely a tough decision. I remember the funniest thing from my perspective, and I can connect you up probably with some of the other Destroy All Humans people who can defend themselves from this story I'm going to tell. But I remember like I think it's fair to say that they were pretty exhausted and overwhelmed towards the end of that project. It was just, these even PS2 games are really hard to make. It's a lot of work. So yeah, they were definitely feeling, I think, under the gun. They were like running low on time. They were like trying to get everything finished. And so like, me, this idiot coming over from the LA studio, kind of just parachutes in one day. And I'm like, all right, well, first of all, we just got to understand where we're at. So I remember we spent, man, it must have been like, in my memory, it's like 48 hours straight. We kind of just like went into one of the conference rooms and we're like, all right, we're going to diagram out the entire game from the moment you put the DVD in the tray until the moment the final ending cinematic plays. And we're just like, just drew it up on the whiteboard, and like we were like grabbing people, like, all right, who knows what the status of this mission is? Who knows what like dragging them in and like pulling all this stuff. And I remember we just had this hilarious moment where we're like, because like, part of what was being revealed to me on that board was like, here's the story of the game, right? Because I wasn't that familiar with all of these else. So like, it was like, all right, so you do this and you get abducted here and this happens there and blah, blah, blah. And there was just this gap in the middle where it was, I forget what the story beat was, but it was like, it was something like your UFO gets shot down or something. Spoiler warning for Story Humans 1. Sure okay. Something like your UFO gets shot down. And I remember going, so we had that written on the whiteboard. Yeah, you take off, your UFO gets shot down, and then you're in the government Area 51 facility or whatever. And I was like, okay, how does the player know that happened? And like, I just remember like people looking at each other and they're going, well, I think it happens in gameplay, right? And the other person's like, no, I think that happens in a cutscene, right? And we just like had this awkward moment where everyone in the room realized we had just forgotten to make this piece of content, and there was no actual story beat that was going to tell you that like you were just going to go from you're about to get in your UFO and then suddenly you're going to be in Area 51, and there was no like explanation. Wow. And so I remember that on that day I was like, I called back to LA and I was like, yeah, we're going to have to make an emergency cutscene here. Like we need to clear off some space in someone's schedule to go make a UFO gets shut down cutscene. That's my memory of it. If any Destroy All Humans people remember it differently and I'm telling the story wrong, I apologize. But that's my memory of it. I definitely remember that kind of just funny. It was almost like a scene from The Office kind of moment where it's like, just like, you did this, right? No, you did this. And just that realization that this was just a completely unaccounted for chunk of work.
So obviously you guys had your great years, and sadly, eventually a pandemic did close down. And I remember when I was talking to Scott, he thought it was because there was so much ambition. You guys sort of got ahead of yourself, became spread too thin. And I just want to know how you felt pandemic's closure, what led to it, and what happened overall.
Well, look, I think you'd probably get a lot of different answers from a lot of different people, and I think there's a lot of different contributing factors. But yeah, I think it's fair to say, like, I think we kind of, I don't think we managed the transition to PS3 era development super well. I know just talking about the Mercenaries team, like I think, we made a decision to redo a lot of our technology between the two games, which kind of made sense at the time. We were like, hey, this Mercs, the game we made, the engine we used to make Mercs 1 was already pretty old and it had a lot of limitations. And so we're like, all right, we got this new hardware. It's all crazy powerful. Let's make a new engine to kind of to like leverage all the power of these new consoles. And in retrospect, I think that was a mistake we made. Like that was like, it ended up taking, it seems obvious in retrospect, but at the time I didn't know this. Like it took way longer to make the new engine than I would have guessed, probably like a year or two longer than I would have guessed.
Wow.
And so that took up a lot of time. And just, meant we had to put a lot of time and a lot of people into just building new technology, which wasn't able to go into, iterating on the game. And so I think that dynamic kind of played out in a few different ways. Like just, these games just ended up, I think we were surprised by how much harder it was to make games for what at the time was the next-gen consoles. And I think it's fair to say, like, something like the PS3, I think even Sony, I think, but after the PS3, they were like, wow, that thing is too hard to make games for. And the whole the whole idea of the PlayStation 4 was, let's get back to basics. Let's make it easier for the developers. Let's provide really good tools. Let's make this thing a comprehensible architecture that you can actually wrap your head around. And it's much easier to like make cross-platform games. So I think even Sony kind of were like, oof, we may have overdone it with the PS3. So yeah, I think that was a big part of it. We kind of got caught in that console transition. We kind of stumbled on that one a bit. But then I also think like things have a lifespan. I think the biggest bummer for me was just we had a bunch of really great teams and a bunch of really great people who lost their jobs. That was by far the worst part of it from my perspective. From me personally, honestly, I was kind of ready for the next chapter. I was like, I would have had fun making Mercenaries 3. I was also ready to move on to different kinds of, creative challenges and different kind of games. So like, I was like, I was pretty philosophical about it even at the time. It was like a decade is a long time to do anything, right? And so I was kind of like, this feels like a natural end to things. There's also obviously the cliche in the games industry of EA buying studios only to shut them down. It's almost in a way like, well, I won't say it's an honor to be on that list, but I will say it's kind of funny to just be one of those in the list of EA acquisition casualties. But I don't want to make light of it. Like I said, the worst part of it to me was just, we had a lot of people who had to go and find a new job in an expensive city. And I think, from my perspective, it seems like the pandemic diaspora has done really well. Like, it's amazing. Like, you go all around the world into game studios and you'll find ex-pandemic DNA everywhere, and so that's really, really cool. Like, and I think it's kind of a pretty good alumni network that exists of like, ex-pandemic people kind of keeping tabs on each other. And
it's almost like a cult. Like when I was looking up people to talk to about this project, I felt like everywhere I looked, there's just crops of ex-pandemic employees.
That's right. The pandemic Illuminati. We're secretly behind everything now. I think it's it was tough and a shame. And I think a lot of people took it really hard. Look, things come to an end. They have to, not everything can last forever. And, I prefer to think back and look back on, man, we had an amazing run, like,
oh gosh, yeah.
I feel very fortunate to be part of a company that got to have that string of successes and got to work on, we had a lot of creative freedom and we had a lot of, autonomy to do the things the way we wanted to, which was, that was good and bad, and sometimes that was really good. And sometimes we would make, decisions like, hey, let's rewrite our technology. And we had enough autonomy to do that. And maybe that didn't work out so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy how it was like went so high, and then it was like the games didn't get worse. That's the crazy part. Usually, you see a diminishing of quality, and then the sales reflect that. But the final...
I think there's something kind of nice about about Saboteur being the swan song. I think we closed on a really strong note, and it's always delightful to me to see. What an amazing, you mentioned a cult, like what a cult following the Saboteur has, like it's, you still see it on Reddit and stuff to this day. People are like, oh man, that game was amazing and ahead of its time. And, that was a real labor of love for that team. And I know a bunch of the people on that team, and I know the love they have for each other to this day. I think they went through a really long, challenging development experience together and really grew as developers. And created something really unique and amazing.
Yeah, because there's nothing like it. The whole black and white and then adding color to the world.
Yeah.
There's still to this day nothing like it. And that's sort of, I think, what made Pandemic so special is such as Battlefront, where they go, hey, what if you just played as like a normal stormtrooper and put them on the battlefield? Like, wouldn't that be cool? And the same thing with Lord of the Rings Conquest. And Mercenaries, like, as you said, GTA in a war zone. I feel like each of these games just had a very unique genesis, like a thought that was built around that's made each of them so unique, and that's why it's such a strong pedigree.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is testament to the Pandemic founders, honestly. So there was, Josh, Andrew, and Greg were the three founders, and they were president, CEO, and EP, executive producer. And I think they all had really unique strengths that helped us get there. Like, I think, Josh was just a great salesman and just a really great representative for the company, and he could sort of go in and like get us deals and get us funding and just be really persuasive and a great front man for the company. And a great businessman, really good at like making sure we had the right money. So, he was excellent in that role. Andrew was very much kind of behind the scenes creative. And like certainly on Mercenaries, I worked with him pretty closely on that. And, he was very good at kind of like helping boil things down to that simple one sentence concept. Like that was something I feel like I learned from him during my time at Pandemic, was the value of being able to summarize an idea in that one sentence. Like that's how you kind of keep, when you're going to have something that's worked on, by hundreds of people over multiple years, you need something really simple that people can look at in the horizon and go, all right, that's where we're going. We're trying to make GTA in a war zone. Like, there's a lot of complexity around that, but big, simple idea. Like you can kind of keep everything straight. So Andrew, I think, was really good at kind of at helping boil things down to that level. And then Greg is my memory of him, like he's still in games, still doing amazing stuff. But yeah, he was just a production powerhouse. Like he was just really, really great at getting things organized and making sure that everything was on track, and like, helping teams figure out the right plan to get things done. Kind of a hot ass, he would come and kick our ass from time to time. But, I think he was a real kind of, prime mover behind, just getting these projects done and shipped, and, a lot of that hard work of, actually turning them into real products. So I think that was part of the Pandemic magic from my perspective, was those three founders really complemented each other in important ways. And, and we're very trusting of like, me, some idiot from Australia who's like, yeah, I'll design a game. And they, they gave me a lot of creative freedom to kind of go and take a lot of creative risks and try a bunch of things. I think most of which worked out. Not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everything panned out as good as it possibly could have in the scheme of things.
Everything pandemicked out?
I was going to say, I almost stumbled into a little pun there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my list of questions, man. Unless there's anything you wanted to add on at the end there for yourself, or something that maybe you wanted to talk about that I maybe didn't broach with a question.
No, I think we pretty much covered it. It's a time I look back very fondly in my career. I think I learned a ton. I think I met a bunch of amazing people. So I'm just super grateful to have been a part of it. If one thing I will say, like, I think people should come and follow me on Twitter @Gribbly.
Yes.
My feed is two things. It's me promoting my new game, Rec Room. So everyone should come and play Rec Room. And two, it's like I retweet game jobs. So I'm really interested in bringing new people into game development. If people have questions, or they want, just want to ping me about stuff, like I'd be happy to be just kind of like, I'd like to help more people, get oriented, get into the industry, figure out what priorities are important for getting into the industry these days. So yeah, if people want to come and connect with me on Twitter, I'd love to talk about that stuff.
Perfect. All right, we'll have that on screen. And
all right,
I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. I know you're a busy guy, and your input and feedback is very valuable.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. Thanks for being interested in our crazy old company.
Of course, man. All right, and we'll wrap it up there. So next up, we've got Scott Warner. Scott Warner focused on the Mercenaries franchise. So here we go. This is once again Scott Warner.
You're gonna riff, or you're gonna ask me some questions?
No, I have questions. I was just gonna. I'm saying, like, you can just start off by telling me like your position at Pandemic, what you did there, what you do now, and kind of just talk a little bit about your time there. The good, the bad, if there was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And go for it.
Well, I was at Pandemic about 8 years, I think. And I started as a game designer there, working on the Warrior project. And eventually, this team, and it's most of my time working on that franchise. I worked on both the first one, the second one.
Okay.
I was the lead for the second one.
Right.
And then was going to be the lead for the third one, and then at that point I took off.
Right. Okay. So I want to know because I was looking at the series a lot last night, just to kind of give myself a refresher. And do you know how the idea for this series actually came about?
Mercenaries?
The Mercenary series, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, uh, in 2000, I want to say the end of 2001, a small team at Pandemic was for working on like a volleyball game or something for,
Okay.
it was nuts. There was like volleyball in ball above New York City. It just, you'd have to ask Cameron Brand about this one, but
Did that get shut down? You guys never got that out, right?
so right around that time, I don't know how we came into contact with EA or what the deal was, but EA wanted us to game in their Strike series from the 90s. So, Strike was like a helicopter action game.
Okay.
We decided that we agreed with them to do another one of those games. And basically we developed some technology that allow us to kind of do something like that. But key to that tech was the functionality to be able to destroy any asset in the world for the most part. And so there was some tech around, being able to sort of use your high-powered helicopter to be able to lay waste to things. They were working on that for some time while I was working on Full Spectrum Warrior.
Okay.
EA came to and said, "Hey, this is cool, but quote is going to be a sign of the times." It was this is definitely not going to sell 1 million copies, which was kind of like.
Is that kind of like a crushing blow to hear from them? Like, oh, we're working on this thing, and they're telling you it's not going to sell well at all?
Well, I mean, what they meant was like at that point, the EA metric for selling well was like 1 million.
Okay.
Days it'd be like 10 million. Crushing blow, I'm not totally sure because I hadn't joined the team at this point. I just remember the order of operations.
Right.
Look, there's this game that's becoming very popular called Grand Theft Auto. Take this idea or take this technology or take some idea and put these together and start working on an open world action game. I was pretty excited to hear this because before joining Pandemic, I had worked for Black Isle Studios.
Really? Okay.
It was, we made non-linear role-playing games, interesting worlds. And I really loved that kind of experience. I'd grown up with things like that. Like I grew up with the Ultima series and other big CRPGs and that sort of thing. But at that point, there really wasn't that kind of experience on a console. This is sort of lost on people now, but Grand Theft Auto really ushered in the capacity to be able to do big nonlinear things on console.
Mm-hmm.
It was wonderful. And agreed, and they decided to change the game from the helicopter action game into a third-person action game.
Okay.
Went on for, I forget how many months, but let's say it's like 6 months or so. It was becoming like a military action open world action game. It was kind of in the spirit of the times. I think it was set in Iraq or something. I could be wrong about that.
The first Mercenaries?
Before it was called Mercenaries.
Okay. It was originally. Oh, wow.
It was called Strike or something or Desert Strike or something like that.
Gotcha.
And that was going on reasonably well. Developed pretty good gameplay mechanics for that. And at that point, I had joined the team because I discovered that while a cool idea was not my kind of game, and I was seeing the Mercenaries or the sort of pre-Mercenaries liked what was happening there, and I really liked the team a lot. I joined that team I think early 2003.
Okay.
We were setting out to make a very open world action game. And the point was, I had kind of an eye-opening experience, which was what happened when you start working with a major publisher like EA from a third party, which is that you have some level of control of what you're doing for the support of a big company and a lot of money, people to account to, and you may not get every decision that you want. So at some point, our conversations with EA basically went along the ways of, I think we need to go our own way because we feel like it's not going to be of benefit to our studio. So we had originally sort of negotiated a contract that would let us do that. Pandemic, and EA agreed to split ways.
Okay.
When that happened, we were allowed to take the technology and the tools, but we couldn't take the assets.
Oh.
And our CEO and our CCO, that'd be Josh and Andrew, came to us, what would become the Mercenaries team, and said, independent again with this project, what do you want to do? This obviously was just such a fun time because now we just have complete control of what we're doing. And these brainstorming sessions really well because basically the composition of the creative team for Mercenaries, you had who loved role-playing games. There were some of us who had made role-playing games at Black Isle. I think 3 people from Blizzard who'd kind of gone through the Warcraft, StarCraft era. And they too loved. And our creative director, Cameron Brown, his favorite game was Virtua Fighter. I have a lot of love for role-playing games. So there was a natural creative, I think, tension or whatever you want to call it, but it was a good kind of like balance between all things. So when we would talk about wanting to make something like, he's like, I don't know what that is, but something that we did end up centering on quite a bit. Probably makes sense if you remember the game and then you draw the dotted line to Mercenaries. We kind of got interested in the idea of making a Jagged Alliance-like game.
Okay.
A lot of initial ideas started kind of coming from that. It's like, what if we had like a team of mercenaries, that kind of had contracts that they could go deal with, and something where they could basically make money at sort of taking individual contracts about how they would approach those, both in the sort of meta structure of it and also in the mechanic structure of it. We came to that idea pretty fast, trying to build or sort of round out the sort of game mechanics and technology around building out a mercenary-style game. So the idea for Mercenaries from that period of time in like basically mid-ish 2013, and we settled on North Korea as the first setting, is that we were looking for some place to set it, and it came from me or someone else, and then I went to investigate it. All I remember at that time was that I opened up an issue of this periodical called Wallpaper, Architecture and Design. There was a photo journey on North Korea, and I had never seen North Korea before, really, and really kind of seen any kind of like sort of deep dive into the country. And all this sort of Cold War architecture that I'd never seen before, and these crazy buildings and monuments, and I was just kind of fascinated by this. well, clearly this is the place where we need to set this, because there's all these interesting things to blow up. So yeah, pretty soon after we had our technology, we had our setting. 2013, we had a proof of concept. We were one of the missions from the ship game sort of built, and
Wait, you cut out a little bit. Sorry. Would you mind just repeating that?
we had one of those. We had one of the missions sort of built, and I think we showed it to Lucas, and we were blown away that Lucas was interested, because they just seemed like the Star Wars company.
Right.
They agreed, and we hauled off on starting to make Mercs in earnest, and a lot of sort of make the game up. We were just kind of inventing on the fly.
Is that typical in game development, going on the fly, or were you guys just feeling it here?
Not so much anymore. The reason being is because budgets are so huge now that you're responsible to kind of go, sort of wander around without knowing exactly where your North Star is at.
Gotcha.
How open world action games definitely used to be is that a lot of kind of, basically experimenting, and it would be incredibly messy until damn near the end of the project. And I would say that Mercenaries was was all that messy because we had a really good sort of mechanical and technical foundation around destruction and action.
Right.
To come the game some form took some time, and there was a couple of concepts that really next level. One was, I think it was Cameron who came up with the GTA in a war zone.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah, and everybody everyone who's worked on a big team or in game development knows and can attest to. It's like that, like where all of a sudden you're able to sort of just concept of things very simply. Mm-hmm. It could just galvanize the creative process. All of a sudden, like everyone knows, oh yeah, I got it. Now I know what this is. Like a good example of that too. Pitch statement for Dead Space was Resident Evil in space.
Oh.
Everybody on the team knows exactly what the game is. And so as soon as we said GTA in a war zone, the team pretty much got it. Around that same time, maybe a little bit earlier, I remember there was the concept of the deck of cards associated with high-value targets. And we just took that and ran with it as a game structure, and that became a pretty nice feature of Mercs. We had the deck of 52, and you were just going to go through the deck of cards in order to try and capture your low to high-level value targets.
Right.
So that helped structure, how we were going to organize the game, in terms of kind of the smaller encounters and the primary targets that were going to drive sort of like the sort of story structure to the game. We came to the nonlinear encounter flow pretty early, of trying to sort of allow people to approach things however they wanted to. Being a really easy way to build the game. Most structure, you basically have the capture or kill version of the encounter. And basically all you had to really do is build the capture version of the encounter. The player to sort of go through and have to sort of consider every aspect of how they progress through an encounter puzzle. But if it was the kill 'em version, they just laid waste to the encounter. Mm-hmm. Right? So it was sort of their way of sort of upping the ante and how much money they wanted to get out of, or how much completion they wanted to get out of the game. I don't know if the rest of the team feels this way, but I often refer to us as the kill switch of open world action games. There's a lot of concepts that kind of trace back to Mercs and some of the sort of exploration we did. Like,
I feel like you could see some of Mercs in like the Saboteur, for example, one of your your later open world games before the studio closed down. Like, you could definitely see it was a defining title for you guys for the future.
Or more, I would say even more pervasively, the approach to an open-ended action encounter like we did is now, I think, what people refer to as the Far Cry encounter. And that concept of taking outposts and coming over and approaching them in however angle you want to was definitely, if we're not the first, we're one of them. I don't know who's before us. Maybe Freedom Fighters, which is we took some inspiration from. The concept of using airstrikes and deliveries as sort of spells in a modern shooter. Sure that those had some influence on kill streaks in Call of Duty. Obviously, destroying everything in the world, that was something that we pioneered. So it was a game full of a lot of new ideas, that having a really good sort of some technology, some good technical people, some really good creative design. The design team that I worked with there was the best I've ever worked with.
Wow.
We really had really, really great time making it. Some people feel like we crunched more than I think, but I don't in the continuum of crunch in my career, I that bad. So
yeah, sorry, it was like a little cutout.
I said I don't remember it being all that bad.
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying that from my point of view. There may be some people who disagree with me, but I don't think it was that.
What I find most interesting is, because you mentioned like GTA in a war zone, destroying the entire world, and how that's sort of a part of Pandemic's pedigree, because you think also of Destroy All Humans, that allowed a lot of world destruction. And what I find most interesting about Mercenaries is that it's such a fun game. You had the disguise system, like everything kind of pushed you to get money. It's a crazy open world that's destructible. You sort of had a choice of who you wanted to work for. But it was all grounded in this, what I'd consider like a plausible future at the time. You're like, wow, hold on, this is something that I could really buy into. And was that a part of the design as well? Like, hey, this is going to be a crazy fun game, but what's going to really hook, I wouldn't say hook the player, but what'll kind of drag them in initially is that this is believable. Is that ever an aim for your guys' games? Or is it just straight fun?
Well, if you were sort of, I mean, this was a topic of much debate. Of course, of the two games, really. At first, I'm not so sure we felt like it should be grounded. Our pillars for the game, a lot of games established as kind of like your sort of foundation philosophical statements for what you're doing. It's going to have an open world. It's going to have sandbox gameplay. It's going to have destruction obviously was very important. And then, so a zeitgeist at the time, which, the PMC was something that was evolving in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the sort of the concept of the gun for hire instead of the typical traditional military. So floating around in culture, it wasn't really until the second game that we really started to kind of who we were, whether we were going to be grounded or more over the top or action oriented or whatever. And for the second game, we realized we had to do that because it was clear that in order for the fantasy to have more resonance, we would have to build out more of the universe and the world, etc. At that time, we definitely started to try and sort of figure out, are we more realistic, quasi-realistic, or is it more, as some people on the team, myself included, felt, are we more like Metal Slug? We never really reconciled that, honestly. It was really tough. I'm not saying anything I don't say to Cameron's face, because he and I are incredibly good friends, but was not his favorite thing in the world. He's a gameplay person.
Right.
And on the second one, the company almost made him become a story and world person, and I don't think he enjoyed that.
We're human.
We did a whole lot of work on trying to figure out that story for the second one, and final motivating, like, call to action in that game is you get shot in the ass, which couldn't be around. So,
the second one. Sorry, you go on.
Kind of wrestled with it throughout the entirety of the history of the franchise, and my takeaway from that, the thing I learned was, for you to make a truly successful open world action game, to really have it, be something where people appreciate the nature of an open world, you have to have a fantasy that's multifaceted. I mean, really multifaceted. So, for example, if you go to talk to somebody and ask them, tell me about the Old West as a fantasy or being an outlaw, they can just start naming off everything. Oh, it's about like playing or playing blackjack or, cattle wrestling or, the Old West or any of the things that you see show up in Red Dead Redemption.
Right.
Whereas when you say that, ask people about mercenaries, they typically had two responses, which was like, as in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, or Blackwater fantasy, and if you say, well, what does the mercenary do not shooting people, there isn't a lot of detail there. There's not a lot of good answers, and that's part of the problem that we ran into, is that our fantasy well-rounded enough to support a lot of different experiences. So that was a big creative takeaway from Mercenaries, at least for me.
Right, and in the second one, the world was truly like full-on destructible. You added in co-op, headed to Venezuela, and this was the one that you took like a higher position at. Was there any takeaways from the first one that you applied to this one, or is a lot of this just takeaways after working on the series and letting it bake for a while and thinking about it as you moved on to greener pastures, we'll call it?
Honestly, on that project, most of what I was wrestling with is it was my first sort of leadership position. So on leading a project with double the design team and a lot of historical experience there with what the game's supposed to be. And we went head first into a period of time, like a lot of companies, with new technology and tools and the PS3 at that time. And it was just tough. So, I mean, we had all kinds of different ideas about, what the game was going to be and how we would incorporate destruction in a more meaningful way, and how, the metagame impacted everything that we were doing. We had a bunch of ideas about how this would work. Ended up, for a variety of reasons, scoping all the way damn near back to like, it's basically just Mercenaries with co-op. Getting that done was even like, sort of a monumental task. So my takeaways from Mercs 2 were more organization of a game, or more about the business and the things that can go wrong, and being more humble, because we went into all of our games 2005-ish era just on top of the world, because pandemic had been successful with Mercenaries and Battlefront and Destroy All Humans. BioWare, who were also enjoying a lot of success, and came out of those next 3 years just kind of like this battered veteran. Tough.
What was it What was it like, if you don't mind me asking? I don't want to say like you were on the decline, but I guess the golden age was winding down, so to speak. I don't think your products, and I know maybe I have a little bias, I don't think your products ever like wavered in quality, but there was, I guess, a wavering in popularity amongst people. And did you feel that in the studio a little bit?
I think I would color it differently.
Okay.
Because basically what happened was 2005, like we just had a number of hits. And then the next period that everybody hears from pandemic is kind of the second wave of our products. And that's after we go through this incredibly difficult period of time. I think the reason that pandemic ends up wavering is because our games just weren't as good on basically post elevation buyouts, and they weren't as good, not because of the quality of the company or the creative. It was because we took on too much. We were encouraged to grow the company.
You were encouraged to what? Sorry.
So we were encouraged by our investors to grow the company, just as BioWare was encouraged to grow their company. Successful at being able to manage three projects at a time, turn that into 5 projects, and all 5 of them are open world action games. Each one of them is going to require like triple the team size that you were used to. The managing of effort of that is just was beyond everybody. Just the managing part of us, that scope, and that doesn't even get into the PS3 era, in which Sony drops like a brand new sort of hardware architecture on everyone, and they have to sort of scratch their heads to figure out how it works. And a lot of companies, ourselves included, decided we were going to go tackle the prospect of central technology. So we said, hey, we've been using, a lot of the pandemic games have been built on the Interstate 76 engine for a long time. We decided we were going to do brand new tech and tools, and it was going to be wonderful and awesome. And into that, it was just a mess. Like we just took on too much, and our tools and our tech weren't working, and really an end in sight. And even making a game like Mercenaries, where conceptually it was very similar to what we'd done before, was hard. Trying to do new things, like they were trying, not even conceptually were different. So I think the problem got beyond us because we grew too fast. And BioWare's great foresight or luck or whatever it was is they decided not to do as many projects.
Right.
It's the company better on just making things like Mass Effect and the Old Republic. So better in a better position than us to be able to handle all of the challenges that came in front of us. It's kind of we definitely did it to ourselves, and it was kind of heartbreaking.
So would you consider yourself happier now after your time with pandemic, or do you really just miss those days? If you don't want this, by the way, on the record, I'm more so just asking in general. But
no, I really miss pandemic. Lots of people do.
Don't we all?
We had a great time there. Company was great. I mean, the company had issues like every other company, but I mean, all up in general, it was a great place. We had great leadership. I'm pretty certain if you talk to anybody from pandemic, they will have nothing but good things to say about Josh and Andrew and Greg, who ran the company.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I've noticed is pretty much anyone I've reached out to has been really like positive and helpful, and like seems to miss those days. And strangely enough, it feels like everyone I've also contacted has like held on to stuff that was canceled or never before seen, like gameplay or concept art or trailers or whatever. It just seems to be a theme where at this point, like I told you, I've reached out to 3 people, and all 3 people are like, yeah, including you, like I've got tons of stuff that just no one's seen before, And I don't know if that's part of just
Mm-hmm.
like, a game developer's work is like, I just create content. I don't develop games, but I don't know if that's just a thing they do, just save everything, or if it's like I want to go back and look at this one day or something kind of thing. Like it's kind of strange that everyone from Pandemic has shared that quality from my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they don't have that stuff because typically companies don't want you to be taking it away from the company. Pandemic obviously is defunct, so it's a little bit different. But
Right.
um, I think in general people had a pretty positive experience there, and it was a fun company to work for, and I think we did a lot of things there. So I definitely took a lot of the lessons from Pandemic. I was definitely proud that I was able to Pandemic at 343. A great legacy of 343 is how much of that 04 is due to people from Pandemic.
Yeah, it was a good game. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of like our lead gameplay engineer was Frederick Pearson, who made 2 engines for Pandemic. I was there, obviously. Brad Welsh was there, who was creative director at Pandemic and worked with me on Mercenaries games. Tom French, who was the sort of the lead designer for Saboteur, was with me on Halo 4 as well, along with Brad. And John was from Pandemic, Evo, just a bunch of people. Adam Pino.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
The success of 343 basically was early on. Key people who started. Kenneth Scott, David Berger, and myself. And the reason I say key is because we were key in people that we had worked with. So Kenneth was able to bring a lot of people from id, bring a lot of people from FASA, and I brought a bunch of people from Pandemic. And between the 3 of us, we quickly had probably 40, 50 who had all shipped high quality action games before. So big help. But the thing that made me happy was because we were to bring so many people from Pandemic, we were able to like make it so those people who had put all of their effort and time into the final Pandemic products and maybe not have them turn out as well as they could then have a great experience of making Halo and then quality and having it, feel like, okay, now all this hard work has meant something. I have this thing I'm truly proud of. Billions of people have bought this. And a lot of it's at least influenced by our and technical philosophies that we earned and honed at Pandemic.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's sort of almost a coming of age tale. It was as if it was scripted,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the list of questions I generally have right now. I guess now if there's more you had to say in general, but if time's limited, we could just sort of move on to some of the never before seen stuff that you said you had. It's up to you either way you want to go.
Let's maybe a few more questions, and then the stuff I have to show you, we have to postpone by a few days because my computer died.
Oh no. Okay.
So I have it all backed up. It's just I have to replace the power supply on my computer.
All right. Yeah, that's no problem with me. Yeah, then do you when just for the sake of knowing when we do that again, would we have to hop in a call or would you just email it to me? Is that how it would work? Or?
I'll email you some assets.
Okay. All right. Cool. Anyway. All right. Well, I'm gonna ask a few more questions. I guess you talked a lot about Mercenaries. Have you worked during your time at Pandemic? Did you put your hands on any other franchises or was it just Mercs?
I started on Full Spectrum Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
With the creative director there. It was the beginning of my time there for the first year and a half, was mostly on that project. And interesting and surreal coming from making role-playing games. Like I'd worked on Planescape and Icewind Dale, and all of a sudden I'm making like a military. It was odd. Worked on that, and then I spent a lot of time on Mercenaries, and maybe in which we weren't doing Mercs was towards the end of development of Mercs 1. The game wasn't going to do well because we hadn't seen it in press, and Lucas wasn't really doing a lot of about the game at that time.
Right.
And so we were just preparing for a future in which we're not going to. We actually kicked Saboteur off. Like we were originally going to make Saboteur as the Mercenaries team.
Oh wow! So that Saboteur was like concepted for years, pretty much. The general idea, I'm guessing.
Started in late 2004.
Wow. When did that game come out again? Like, was it
2009?
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Wow.
And initially, a few of us, I know myself for certain, down on the idea because, it was originally pitched to us as like a sort of a clandestine World War II thing. And at that time, I was just kind of World War II'd out from Call of Duty and some of the games at the time. Mm-hmm. Then they started sharing the concept of the sort of race car driver becomes secret agent, and we started seeing concepts of sort of like the black and white treatment of the city, these sort of brightly colored Bugatti cigar cars, and I was just like, oh man, this looks awesome. And we started getting pretty excited about the idea of making sort of an action role-playing game set in the French Resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I can still say to this day, there's absolutely nothing like the Saboteur. There's just not, like, artistically speaking, world space wise, it's incredibly unique.
Yeah, so we started making that, and then Mercs blew up. Or the first month of 2005, we were the #1 game. We beat the release of Resident Evil 4 because Resident Evil 4 had the misfortune of being just on the GameCube. So that was kind of an achievement. And so that changed our fortunes considerably to sort of with a couple of people, most notably Tom French, work on Saboteur in earnest. And middle of 2005, they put together gameplay proof of concept demos I've ever seen. It didn't ship in the game because it was a little bit too ambitious, but it was just Indiana Jones, like sort of hijacking a vehicle, fighting on the sides of vehicle and doing it in real time. And it was everybody. That was like the highlight of pandemic, was just this demo was just the potential for the game at that point just kind of blew up. So to make Mercs 2, we're almost kind of sad to see Saboteur go to another team because it just seemed like such a great idea. And then, it took a long time for that sort of to congeal into something else. So an example of things that I was involved with for a little bit. And then around that time, we were also pitching to publishers different ideas. And I seem to remember Ring stuff. And I'm pretty sure I pitched a role-playing game like set in the First Age, somewhere alien or whatever. Quickly into Mercs 2 at that point. So,
right.
And then most of our time post Mercs 2 was just Mercs 3. How do we improve, and how do we go into this brave new world of in 2009 and trying to make more of an action or a multiplayer version of that game. Just a lot of different stuff.
Right.
But that was pretty much it as far as my involvement with things at Pandemic.
And actually, this is just a general game developer question. How would you describe, I guess, what you do? Right, you're a designer or a lead designer. What does that job entail, really?
Well, these days I'm a game director.
Okay.
And the simplest way to put it is that we typically work with a creative director who owns the overall high-level vision of the game, the world, the narrative, the universe, the kind of product we're going to make, parameters in which we work within. And the game director usually works with the team to translate that into the actual game itself. And so what are the systems going to be, what are the levels, philosophically, sort of setting the box tighter and making the thing. To have these kind of positions, it used to be like, for example, 20 years ago, you probably just needed a lead designer, vision for the product. Like when I worked on Planescape, alone is listed as lead designer. And he absolutely has the vision. He's sort of the creative director and the lead designer on that one. Teams have gotten bigger. You have more of a need for some organizational hierarchy and overview. So, we've started having positions like creative directors and game directors, and so forth.
Okay.
My expertise comes from design. I started as, I guess, quest designing and scripting at Black Isle is primarily what I did. Got concerned if I kept sort of being that kind of designer, it would be a little bit limiting, because at that time there was a real, 2001 around there was a real sort of existential crisis within American game developers that lots of us weren't working on console action games, and it seemed like the PC was going to die and everything was going to be consoles. It's like, oh my God. So I quickly tried to find an action place to work at, which is why I ended up at Pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And since then, a lot of my experience has been building level, like encounters and scripting, and our interest in designing enemies and artificial intelligence. Probably the thing I was most preoccupied with on Halo 4 was coming up with a brand new the player to fight. And so a lot of my sort of deep dive into things has been on how do we construct encounters that sort of fit, I should say encounters that are sort of sandbox in nature, allow for emergence, allow players to do them in different ways, and have the AI respond in kind to that, to make sure that the AI is sort of like a cruise director of fun.
Right.
Sort of, gives you an experience that lets you feel like your creativity is meaningful.
Did you have your hands on the multiplayer aspect at all, or is that like a separate design process of its own?
Halo 4?
Yeah.
So the way that Halo games were organized up to that point, and our game wasn't an exception, these sort of different groups that make up the game. You have like a gameplay team, and you have a multiplayer team, and a campaign team, and you might have then at a lower level like weapons and vehicles and such. Halo historically had balanced the game was to build a fun multiplayer experience, game features, sort of support a fun multiplayer experience first, and then you take those pieces and you campaign out of them as well. But it's not sort of like handoff as it sounds there. Usually these things are designed in tandem, so the campaign team, for example, knows the gameplay features are going to be as we go along and how those are going to interact with campaign levels and AI, etc. Oversaw all of the Halo 4 design, but moment to moment, I was probably 70% of the campaign and 30% of the multiplayer at that time, because I there with Halo AI, so I wanted to deep dive into that. I ended up in the last year or so, I spent about half of my time building, probably about 20 minutes of the campaign, basically just counters and making sure that were fun, and I had learned how the sausage got made there, so that was really good fun. Brad Welsh, who worked with me and I'd hired at 343 and had worked with Mercenaries in the pandemic. Ended up being the multiplayer lead for that game. 100% pandemic on the design direction there.
And now you're at Ubisoft. So what kind of games have you worked on there?
Nothing we've announced yet.
Okay.
Stuff at the San Francisco studio, but should be interesting. It's been real fun. I love the studio, San Francisco, and Ubisoft is just a game company. I really love their approach to things. I figured I would because there's been open world action games, and that's clearly something I did for a long time.
Right.
Turns out like that, we see things very eye to eye. So I'm.
No, it's awesome. They always, as I interact with them as a creator, when they like reach out to me about like event opportunities and whatnot, they always struck me as a company that sort of understood at least where my positioning was. So it's good to know also internally that you guys have that same understanding, that same eye to eye point of view. And while Ubisoft's one of the biggest companies in gaming right now, I admire their ability to experiment, doing like a Mario and Rabbids, doing what else did they do? Obviously Watch Dogs Legions looks really different from anything we've seen really, and you see what happened with Rainbow Six Siege and how that's blown up, and it's because they're constantly trying new stuff. So yeah, I think they go as one of the more underappreciated big game developers. Like obviously they have their fans, there's plenty of them, but a lot of people quickly like thrash them for something, and I think they're excellent. They're consistent, and it's good to know that internally they treat you guys well.
Yeah, I think that's what happens when you have a company that's largely run by the same people who founded it, and they have a strong love of their medium.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it shows in the attention to what the work is like from the company.
Yeah. That's all my questions though, man. I'm out.
Okay.
I'm out of these questions.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, you gave me way more time than I expected, and you were incredibly thorough. I really appreciate this. This has been awesome. Last but certainly not least is Tom French, who focused on the Saboteur. This was toward the end of the studio's life cycle, where they would eventually close down. So we're getting an idea of what the morale was like in the studio, where they knew it was coming. How was that all for the team? So here we go. Once again, Tom French. You're a lead designer on the Saboteur.
Yep.
And this was sort of the swan song game for pandemic, right? Like this was the one you guys went out on, and it was a high note really, which was interesting. And the main mechanic of that game that always stuck out to me was the black and white leading to color. And I remember when I talked to Scott Warner, he had said that this game had been originally, it was going to be handled by the Mercenaries team, and I believe you were around pandemic at that time, because I think that was like 2004, 2005. And so I just wanted to know from like the beginning of this project, was the plan to use that color as a tool in the game?
Yeah, so where that came from was we finished Mercenaries. We were having problems with LucasArts and trying to figure out like what we were going to do next. And so they were working on some pitches for some other games, and then the concept for this game came up from one of the studio heads, and I built the prototype for it in the Mercenaries engine originally. And we wanted this idea of the will to fight kind of in there being captured. And we were doing it very differently at first. It wasn't as kind of binary as it ended up being, where it was just kind of black and white or color. There was like a gradient curve to it. And so we started to prototype that in the engine that we had. And then it was like partway through, and it wasn't really as polar as it became with the black and white. It was just, originally it was about just kind of desaturating the world and making the world feel kind of sad. And then I was a big comic book nerd, and so it was, like Sin City became, especially when the movie came out, it became like, oh, what if we did that? Because that feels really drastic, and you can feel the kind of tension, and it's palpable. And so once we actually spun the team up, and I got on the Saboteur team, that was like a big focus right from the very beginning, was figuring that out. And we kept the kind of gradient nature for, I think, probably the first year of the project, and then we decided to actually make it more binary, which was, I think it was exciting, because seeing the stark contrast right next to each other made them feel drastically different when you walked in and out of one.
Yeah, it's funny how the color in the game works because almost when I finished a location or rather a section of the world and it would add color to it, I always found myself wanting to go to the next area that was black and white, which is very different from games nowadays. Right nowadays, everyone's trying to pop a ton of color into their game, lots of gradients and lens flare and like all these drastic effects, and it's amazing how this game kind of created its own style just by removing color in a sense and kind of symbolizing the narrative with that. Which would bring me actually to another question, which is when creating the story, was it always this, Irish racer guy who's like unexpectedly sparking a rebellion? Was that always the goal in mind for the story with the Saboteur?
I mean, the spark is off of a real person. Like there was a real driver named William Grover Williams that we kind of looked at inspiration for. He was English, and so that was kind of where we started. And then I mean, I know there was obviously that Irish involved in the war, but we liked the idea that it was a nation that wasn't necessarily directly involved with the war. And so we kind of just kept looking around, trying to figure out what we wanted. And then, we always wanted to keep the race car driver. We wanted to keep the French resistance kind of like inspiration kind of vibe or tone to the game. And that's where we kind of started building from there and just figuring out our own world on top of that.
Right. So it was always going to be a World War II style game, freeing from the Nazis, all that type of stuff.
Yes, that was kind of the core foundation of everything. And a lot of it was the idea was really fascinating to dig into. And then at that time, there was a lot of kind of World War II fatigue in the marketplace.
Yeah, I was going to mention that next.
Yeah, and so that was kind of part of how do we do, I mean, there's still a lot of interesting and vibrant stories in that universe. I mean, even now games are starting to kind of go back there. And so we wanted to explore it, but in a different way that would kind of differentiate ourselves from the traditional, just pushing through and shooting on the front lines.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I think you know by this point in time, but if you don't, I think you guys succeeded. I think that game is truly unique. There's really nothing like it, which is why it stands out amongst so many other World War II titles. But as I said, this was a bit of a swan song game, and so I wonder, as you guys were making this game, did you get that inkling as you were going on, like this? I don't want to sound too drastic, too dramatic, but was it this might be it? Like this might be the last one? Was there that inkling? Because as I interviewed other people from Pandemic, it seemed like everything happened fast. So
yeah,
I didn't know if did you have that suspicion, or were you just kind of boots on the ground, working away, didn't have to worry about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think at the low level we really understood, and we were a team that just really loved working with each other, and we spent, we were there every night, and the way I would describe it is I was working with some of my best friends every night, and we were there till 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning, depending on what we wanted to get done. And so we didn't really think about that. We were just kind of in love with making a game with each other, and we kind of just kept motivating us. But it wasn't really until I had literally come back from a press trip, and I was sick from just being exhausted from traveling all over.
Right.
And my boss contacted me. He's like, you need to get in and fill out your expense report immediately. And I was like, what? And so I rushed in, and he's like, yeah, there's some stuff going on. And there had been some murmurs and suspicions, but I don't know, I was just kind of try to keep our team on the positive and be like, let's just, finish this thing and be proud of what we're building. And so that's kind of what just kept motivating us. And then it kind of swept the legs out under us. And we had already started prototyping a Zab 2 and stuff like that, kind of behind the scenes, Skunkworks a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so it was kind of, I don't know, it was kind of disheartening, and kind of stopped working with a lot of people I really miss and love on a day-to-day basis. But, it happens.
And when it came to the Saboteur 2, what was was there a general framework for the story or the universe? Was it going to be more of Sean, or was it going to be a completely separate part of the world with the same, I guess, gameplay systems?
Yeah, we wanted to build off of it. I mean, I think I think some of the criticism of the game that came out when it came out at the time is pretty fair. And I think there's parts where I think the world didn't understand the difference between a corridor or first-person shooter and what it takes to build an open-world game, and graphic fidelity and things like that.
Right.
And so we were really we wanted to kind of tighten up a bunch of the mechanics. There was a bunch of things that we felt we didn't even nail as well as we wanted to. We wanted to fix a bunch of that. We hadn't really completely settled on the story, but we had kind of plots towards Sean moving into Berlin. And actually, that's what one of our artists, or a couple of our artists, kind of skunkworks prototype Berlin, and then some really cool, like crazy contraptions. Cause we're kind of like a little bit of a fake history, right?
Right.
Or actually quite a lot of it if you really break it down. But, and they had some really cool ideas in there, and just like seeing Berlin realized in our engine and was really cool and different looking. And so it was kind of neat. We wanted to move around more, and kind of push into the enemy, like the hive, so to speak.
Oh wow. Okay, that's awesome. And I'm imagining the whole color no color thing would be a carryover as well. Was that going to be sort of a staple in the series going forth if you guys had a
For sure.
second one?
Yeah, we were really proud of that mechanic. We knew immediately that you looked at our game and you're like, oh, I know what game that is. That was kind of a mantra that we had when we developed it. Like, you could look at a screenshot and immediately understand what you were looking at, what game it was. And so we wanted to carry that forward. We weren't sure how Berlin would be impacted by that, but there was a lot to figure out there. But the difference in architecture kind of immediately, it looked cool. Like, I'll just tell you that much. I'm kind of bummed we never got to actually actualize it.
Yeah, I mean, hey, so am I, because I love the first one, so more of that would have been great. Yeah, and I noticed earlier you said it was like you were working till 2, 4 in the morning on these games with close friends, and that seems to be a theme with Pandemic. Is I always heard how anyone I talked to wasn't just giving me, because this is just stuff I can edit out or whatever. I was always told consistently though that people just loved working here. Like it was a great place to work. And is there any place comparable to your time at Pandemic, really, or was that just a real special time? Because that's often what I hear is that 2005 to 09 era was just like a really good time to be at Pandemic, because it felt like there's a lot of creative freedom. Everyone who worked together seemed to like each other, and I want to act like it was this stress-free environment. Everyone got along. There was no arguing. It's game development, but it seems like there's a lot of fun memories there. So would you say that's fair to say in your case? And is there any comparables, or is it just, like I said, that kind of golden time for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, the industry's changed a lot, like especially after, obviously, like a lot of like the big crunching stories come out, and how the next generation of game developers has come in. Like, I noticed that I work on Halo now, and there's times where you're all kind of in the trenches and you're there till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and but it's kind of not quite the same as Pandemic, where it felt like everybody, partly because I felt like we felt like we had a bigger ship to pull, that then our studio could kind of do on its own. And so you felt like you needed to be there just to make anything move forward, right? To just get as far as you could. And like, I don't know, when I worked with Scott back in Black Isle back in the day, and like that was another studio that I had that same kind of feeling, but we were all just a bunch of young knucklehead game developers. And like at that time, it was like, that was all I knew. For me, it was like, I wanted it to be my art in a way. And so I was just going to put anything into it that I could. And Pandemic kind of became, like, for me, like a second part of that. It just kept that journey going. And yeah, I just made new friends. And like, I know I had a really cool little design team, and we were really close, and I'm still really close to those guys. And one of them moved up here and worked on Halo with me for a while. And then another one has his own studio now. And so you just form these relationships, and I think especially the little core of us that were stayed there all the time, like we would have done anything for each other. And I think we still would. I mean, actually, I'm positive we still would. Like last time we got together, we kind of talked about how, like, I think all of us would take a bullet for each other. We care about each other. So it was really special times. And like, I don't know. I mean, I've had those moments on Halo. Like, I think the last couple games I've had that. And I think the team I have now, I think we're going to have those moments in the trenches. But like, yeah, it is kind of a little bit of like, it's a little different when you're a smaller studio trying to kind of prove yourself. And I think Pandemic went from a AA developer that launched a AAA game, and then kind of that, like, can we keep doing this? And I think that was our expectations, and we wanted to knock it out of the park all the time.
Right. Yeah, and so staying on with the whole working long hours thing. I'm not, by the way, searching for like a crunch story, so don't get me wrong here. Yeah, I'm not like that, because I get it in the sense, I know these are two totally different occupations, but like when I'm working on videos, right? Like sometimes I get caught up in it. Oh, it's 1 a.m. Okay, I guess time to go home. It's like you get so wrapped up in your work, you love it so much. Would you kind of define that's how the work was? And I'm not saying it's separate from 343, where I'm sure it could be the same thing, but at Pandemic, where you kind of got lost in your work and you guys just wanted to push till 2 a.m. to get something done. There obviously you explained your motivation and desire to kind of, I guess, punch above your weight. But was it sort of a getting lost in your work sort of a love for it, or was it more of like a we have to do this too?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, I mean, kind of your point earlier, like it wasn't always a love affair. I think there was groups of us that loved each other, and there was like, friction here and there, and a lot of us were just like, we just wanted to keep proving it. Like this was ours. Kind of you mentioned earlier, like there was a lot of, we felt like it was ours to burden to bear, and if we wanted to make a great game, we had to make a great game, and we had to do it ourselves as much as we could, and so.
Right.
A lot of that was just, just hanging out late at night, trying to get the gunplay to feel better, get this mission dialed in a little bit better. Because it was like when we showed up, it was like that was a piece that reflected us, and we wanted to kind of always show up and show what was our personality and that like what was this thing that we were going to be proud of in the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys should be immensely proud if you weren't already. When it comes to making this game. I try to open up the opportunity for anyone I've had invited on to speak on my project to say, like, hey, is there any untold stories that maybe, now's a good time to take the lid off of it, whether it's a game development story or just like a funny tale, so to speak, anything about the Saboteur that maybe got cut that people may find interesting now. Is there anything like that maybe you were aware of that you'd like to share now?
It's hard to remember all the details from back in the day.
It's
like
so
we're
long
definitely
ago.
kind of far off of that. I think, I mean, I don't know. There was just there was always just kind of dumb little things going in and people laughing about them and be like, oh, wait, we can't ship that. Or I know that like, there's sometimes like we had an elevator. There's the scene where you're in the building that's on fire and you're fighting your way through and trying to get out of the barrier. We had a boss fight originally in there with Dierker's girlfriend that I had to cut out of there. But we had this funny little scene in there where, because everybody's kind of gonna die inside of that building, basically. When there was the two buttons on the elevators that you could go up, and one of them leads in, it collapses. And originally there was like, there were two Nazis kind of like looking at, like longingly looking at each other, and then they kissed, and then the ceiling collapsed on them. It was kind of just a poke fun of like the kind of oppression, and then the kind of like hiding their feelings for each other. It was just little stupid things like that constantly made us laugh or just smile, and then sometimes we'd get in trouble for them, but it wouldn't really matter to us because we would just move on. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. There's a lot of just, I don't know. Again, it's just kind of knuckleheads at a studio having fun and building a game together, and that's kind of the charm. And like kind of, I love hearing your excitement for the game because it's like what I've realized is, whereas we kind of got beat up at the time when we came out, I think in hindsight, people look at the game and see like all the free play stuff we had where you're blowing up the world and kind of changing how you impact missions. And I can see how that's influenced games of today, which is very cool.
Absolutely.
And then ultimately, I think like what I'm most proud of is this kind of feeling that we made a very cool cult game that people still get really geeky about. And will kind of, when they realize I worked on it, they'll talk to like me, like to no end about it. And I kind of forget how kind of a cool little thing that we made, even though it wasn't necessarily a big commercial success. Our studio got shut down. And it's not like a game that is going to go into the pantheon of the greats, but like it's a cult game that people worship and fell in love with. And that is the thing I will take away and love the most.
Yeah, I think you should, just because personally, as someone who, once again, totally different occupations, but when I make a video, sometimes it's not just like how many views did I get. It's like, what's the reception? How many people want to share this? How many people think it's cool? Like, how genuine is that reaction? And oftentimes that means more because it's like, yeah, I made something meaningful. Like this project I'm working on, I doubt it'll do something insanely well. But, at the end of the day, I hope I make something that, I can look back on. I can kind of catalog and say, I made this documentary about arguably one of my favorite developers of all time and all the cool titles they made. And I got to talk to people who helped make that possible. So, yeah, I think personally you got the right path of thinking there. When it came to the shutting down of the studio, I know you talked about how you had just come back from a press trip and you were exhausted. What was I guess, once again, I don't like to use these dramatic words, but, just to paint a picture, the kind of aftermath of it, just because like I said, I know it happened quickly and you guys were sort of working on the last game before it all shut down. So was there anything additional you'd like to toss in there about the closing down of the studio, and more so your perspective on why it shut down? Because I had been told, like, and this is just perspective, mind you, but I had been told, like, oh, we took on too much at once, or we tried to do a little too much, or we tried to spread ourselves too thin, we expanded too fast. Like, how do you view the collapse of pandemic?
So yeah, I mean, I look back and I think, we were pretty much heads down in the trenches on SAB, and we were putting everything we could into that game. And when it shut down, there was around the team, it was a cool moment of pride in that we had just finished this thing that we loved. And like one of our lead environment artists who went off to work at Sony, he had a shirt that was like proud of SAB that he made the night before. Wow. And he was rocking that. And I was like, oh man, that's awesome. Like you could feel his pride. And we went out drinking that night, right? And we were just very proud of what we did. And we ended up having a little post-launch party, because normally you have a launch party after your game, but the studio shut down at the same time. So we had one kind of for Saboteur off to the side, and it had been a couple weeks, and we kind of came back together, and you could feel like I miss being by these people every day. And then after that, what was cool was the studio got gobbled up by every other studio very quickly. Like there was an immense amount of talent at that studio. Like what happened when we came up here to Seattle, there were 20 pandemic people pretty much here by the end of the first year, because basically there was a couple people that started at Microsoft, and they handpick all the best people they could find and drag them up here. And some stayed to do their own projects, some didn't want to leave LA. But you could see like the meat of the studio and the quality of the studio going off into these other games, and then you can see the impact that it had on those games. Like we actually used to call 343 at one point Pandemic North, because we had like 20 developers from that game, from Pandemic there, a lot of the Swedes and stuff like that. So I think we made an impact after that. And to your point of why the studio collapsed, I think kind of to your statement, it was kind of all the above. Like we bit off more than we could chew. We were punching above our weight already. We were trying to at one point share more tech, but like the needs for Saboteur was different than the needs of Mercenaries. And so it forced us to separate our tech. We took on projects that needed to be quick, like the Lord of the Rings game. That team was really tired. Like after they finished the first 2 Battlefront games, like they knew that they were going to get a bunch of money thrown at them to make another game, but they were so tired because they just literally crunched those 2 games out. It just wasn't feasible. And so it was a lot of things like that. And I think I think had we maybe started smaller and punched more AAA with us, instead of trying to spread ourselves out as much as we did, I think maybe we would have been able to carry our weight a little bit better. But it was, I think, trying to figure out how to work in this next world of, I think the 360 actually, or the 360 PS3 era kind of actually killed a lot of AA developers. I mean, we were kind of like a AA plus. We were kind of on that verge and that edge. Yeah. And I think it because of like graphic fidelity, starting to require more people to build a game, and more technology, and like the animation expectations, and the fidelity of the increase between the 2 generations was drastic. And just trying to figure out how to work under the weight of that, and try to understand how big your team needs to be and how much you got to scope to manage that was hard, and trying to be scrappy. And you work faster when you're on a small team. When you're on a big team, it's really hard to move things. And I remember on SAB feeling like, holy crap, we have over 100 people on this game. This is the biggest team I've ever worked on. And then, now I work on games where it's 400 or 500 people at a time. And right. It's just a different weight. And like moving into that is not easy. Like we wanted to be Pixar, but we weren't ready to be Pixar. So
gotcha.
It was interesting.
How comparable is game development around that time to now? And the reason I asked that is because you mentioned AA developers, how they did fizzle out around that generation, which absolutely happened. But now we're starting to see a little bit of a bounce back. You see a team like Spiders, who just made Greedfall. You see a team like Piranha Bytes making Elix. Don't Nod making Vampire. You're seeing these AA developers kind of trying to push the boundaries, sort of like what Pandemic did. You see like little DNA from that. And so with them returning, I want to know from your point of view, is there a difference in development now compared to what you went through with the Saboteur?
For sure. There's like, so when I first started, it was kind of like, it had just moved out of the garages, I would say, like in the mid to late 90s. Like it had just come out of the garage, and it was a bunch of, again, a bunch of people didn't really know how to make a game. You just kind of stumbled through it, more or less.
Right.
And then
it wasn't
in the
as much
2000s,
of a science, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was just kind of like, oh, I got a dumb idea, I'm going to go do that thing. And we did a lot of that. Like at Black Isle, I think half of like Fallout 2 was just like, oh, I had a stupid idea in the middle of the night, I'm going to go make this thing happen. And that was the charm of it. And so moving into that AA, AAA era, and yeah, it did. I think especially around that era when pandemic shut down, it was kind of like the whole world had become, like, video game market had become about massive blockbusters. Like that's all the publishers were chasing. And I think what I've noticed happen kind of post that is a whole, like, basically then the capital A end of the indie game market happened, and you get this world where these little indie game developers are punching way above their weight, and they're making these really cool, innovative indie titles that kind of excited the market in a new way. And then from there, I think that's what kind of led to that kind of that AA market that you're talking about, where it has started, and you're starting to see new ideas pop up in those things. If any area I love to play of games is that big indie kind of like AA kind of area, because you're going to find people that are taking risks and chances, whereas a lot of the bigger level games, right, they're having to serve bigger markets and things like that, and so they're often safer, and sometimes they'll break new ground and stuff, and that's awesome. And I mean, we try to do that every day, but it definitely it took a minute. It literally kind of got put to pasture for probably 8 years, I felt, or 5 years maybe, that the AA market really kind of just took it to the back of the head, and now we're starting to see it kind of swing back. Like I look in the marketplace and the stores on the platforms, and I see new little titles, and I play a bunch of them now because there's really solidly cool games coming out in there that are trying new ideas, and that stuff inspires me.
Yeah, and that's awesome that, because I know a lot of developers who don't play as much, and it makes sense, don't get me wrong, because you're working on something for so long, a game. When you come home, do you want to play more games, or do you want to do something separate from your work? So it's awesome that you're still dabbling in the smaller projects, and I agree that it does bring like that level of innovation, and you're likely going to see a chance taken there, which is why I gravitate towards those games a lot more now, and I like to cover those more and try to give them a little more attention using my platform in a positive way. Overall, though, I don't really have any more questions, unless you wanted to add anything else about the Saboteur. Did you work on anything else at Pandemic while you were there, or was it just mainly, because I know Saboteur started a while ago, and then it got put, like I said, they shifted teams and whatnot, but was there anything else you messed around with at the studio?
Yeah, I mean, so I came into Pandemic for the last kind of 9 months to a year of Mercs, and it was fun because it was like I went from being I started my career as a programmer. Mm-hmm. I became a producer towards the end of Black Isle, and then I hated that. And then Scott actually is the one that pulled me up to Pandemic. He's like, "You're creative. You should be a designer." And so I really cut my teeth into that project, and I've been playing that on the back compat on the Xbox One.
Cool.
And I love that game, and I put a lot of love into that game. I built like 4 missions, and I did a lot of the free play stuff that you do in the game. And then all of that really led to my love of building open world games. Like I'd love to build another one someday. They're really complicated games. Mm-hmm. And you look at like what Red Dead has achieved, like that's incredible. Like they took that to a very artistic level that I think hasn't been, we'll see when that gets kind of pushed against, because that was a high bar. But yeah, they're fun games to work on, and I'm glad that I had my time at Pandemic. Like I said, some of my favorite people I've ever worked with, I worked with there, and I'm glad to just see that everybody's kind of moved on and has found a good new world.
Good, awesome, man. I'm glad that you're happy, regardless of the outcome. Certainly makes sense. It's been 10 years. I'm acting like it happened yesterday. I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and and sharing the stories of another wonderful game from that studio that resonates with me quite a bit. It's such a good game, and I have obviously been playing all these pandemic games in preparation for this project, and it's just like, all of them are timeless. It's such a special studio. There's really not many out there who just produced hit after hit. It's crazy to me. So
Yeah, it was awesome. It was a good time.
Absolutely.